Hey everyone, welcome to our webinar. Thanks for making the time today. My name is Lance Johnson. I'm the VP of Marketing at Trustgrid, and I'm here today with Joe Gleinzer. Joe's the co-founder and chief product officer of Trustgrid, and today we're going to be talking about removing the limitations of cloud fintech applications and integrating SaaS applications to core banking data. As everyone knows, there's sort of been this march to the cloud, and every application, service, data store, really everything has at least considered what a move to the cloud might look like. Why are they moving? Well, first, because they want access to more services, but secondly, because the data centers and staff and on-prem appliances are expensive. They're not really very elastic, and they don't really add value to the organization or the product. They want to be able to offload some of this non-value add stuff, but keep a lot of the same functionality. Plus, the cloud actually improves a number of things. You get faster innovation, which helps you stay competitive, streamlined operations, ease of compliance, and most importantly, it sort of gives you the ability to scale your business up and down really quickly. So a move to the cloud means new approaches for pretty much everything. Infrastructure is the most obvious one, as data centers and hardware-centric approaches are replaced with platform and software-based approaches. Pricing and packaging moves from selling licenses to selling subscriptions based on usage or features or end user count. Code releases happen more frequently. Cloud applications are typically broken down into a set of microservices that can be incrementally updated without having to update an entire monolithic application. Deployments get simplified because new cloud tenants can be spun up relatively quickly. And DevOps teams have to be formed because now you're responsible for the application delivery, and you want to make sure that that's a smooth and consistent experience. And finally, code releases are pushed more frequently, which means testing has to become recursive and continual as those code releases are constantly being pushed. But a super important and really overlooked change is how cloud fintech applications are going to connect back to their customers' core banking data that could be located halfway across the country. This isn't a new problem. Folks have been doing this with centralized SaaS applications for years through a combination of VPNs and MPLSs, and some of the big guys, FIS and Fiservs of the world, have managed hundreds or even thousands of concurrent VPN connections with teams of engineers. But as we move to the cloud, the challenges of terminating into public cloud environments mixed with the desire to really manage everything in a more integrated way gives us the chance to re-envision what a better way might look like. So let's talk about the struggles of cloud connectivity. First, using a VPN in the cloud is a challenge due to the way the applications are built, like I mentioned earlier. Given these applications are often a collection of cloud delivered services instead of just a single box running an application, it makes it hard to terminate a VPN. And on the other side of the network, you have a customer who's expecting a turnkey service, but still has to give you access to their core banking data in the data center. You got a mix of environments, you've got differences in on-site expertise, and just the sheer number of stakeholders involved in this complicates things and slows down new deployments. Obviously, security and compliance is always going to be a concern when dealing with financial data. Consistently applying patches and updates and logging all access is a struggle if all of these connections aren't being managed in the cloud. One of the benefits of operating a cloud application is that you can monitor all customers and system elements from one global view. When those customers are dependent on a completely separate system for the networking component of the application, you've just added complexity and potential blind spots. And finally, all applications from deployment to support have to be done from one side of the network. Things are a lot easier and more expensive when you're in the business of providing truck rolls to get networking experts on site and dealing with those connections. But as a cloud application provider, you don't have on-site devices. You want to be managing everything as if it were in the cloud. So the world looks like this to a cloud fintech provider. You got applications in the cloud, and they're ingesting data from bank data centers. And some sites are using VPN that we have to configure and deploy and manage each VPN at each site individually. And some are managed with MPLS circuits that they're paying hundreds of dollars a month for per site. And each of these are colored differently because you're managing each of them as their own separate data silo. So each of these connections requires weeks to months of lead time for a new connection to be stood up. You've got each is a custom config that has to be managed by a certified network engineer. And because all this stuff is hardware based, you've got networking equipment providers that are going through their planned obsolescence. So they're rendering stuff obsolete, causing forced refreshes to all of their customers. And like I mentioned earlier, the need for on-site support negates some of the benefits of operating the software in the cloud. And managing cloud connectivity like this becomes a bottleneck, and it may work initially. You may say, oh, well, we can use VPNs and this actually works, and you really can get away with that for a little bit. But as you increase the number of connections, it becomes increasingly difficult to scale. And after about 10 or 20 deployments is what we're seeing, you start seeing some of these problems arise. So patches and updates from network vendors are issued frequently. Sometimes they can be issued multiple times a month. And to prevent vulnerabilities, we need to apply those patches as they're released. But when you're doing this, dozens or hundreds of times across all of the connections that you've got, it really starts to become time consuming. So we end up not patching as frequently as we should, and ultimately this puts customers and our business in danger. Monitoring the status of all connections becomes difficult when each of them is a separate system, and changes to things like network address translation, routing, permissions, and even testing becomes increasingly difficult after about a dozen different networks are being manually managed. And it's worth noting here that human interaction is responsible for almost all downtime. So when you have changes happening without centralized processes and approvals, the chance of these failures goes up quite a bit. And finally, troubleshooting, supporting connections becomes really difficult when you have limited visibility. Just diagnosing what failed and what to do about it can eat up crucial minutes of downtime when everything is siloed. And then you've got the second order challenges. So product features end up being limited by what you can accomplish over a VPN or MPLS. You have no economies of scale when you're managing hundreds of custom configured connections. And then finally, the expense of MPLS can run thousands of dollars a year. VPN equipment plus engineering staff can also run thousands of dollars per connection for something that at the end of the day doesn't add any value to the product. Customers don't want to pay for it, and at the end, it ends up eroding our margins and ultimately customer satisfaction. So instead of building siloed tunnels, we ultimately want to manage on-premise connections as if they were in the cloud. Multi-tenant applications require a networking solution that operates like the application's cloud environment. What we really need is cloud native connectivity. And to talk a little bit more about this, I'm going to hand it off to Joe.
Thanks, Lance. And thanks, everybody, for joining today. So as Lance mentioned earlier, my name is Joe Gleinzer. I'm a co-founder here at Trustgrid, and I've worked closely with many of our clients on this problem, specifically in this fintech or community banking space, especially. And what we've seen from our current customers when they come to us for the first time are a number of different ways to solve this problem. The problem being, how do I get access to the data that resides on-premise in these core banking solutions or as check images into my cloud-based applications? There's a number of different ways it's been done historically. A number of our customers installed software on-premise in their customers' data centers in a standalone environment. And I think we all know how that story ends, the complexity, the hassles, the costs on both sides that make that a less than ideal solution. We see some customers that they can get away with non-real-time data. So this is typically data that's days or weeks old, but can work fine for some applications in the fintech space. This is a couple of well-known providers use this method. And as long as your data does not need to be real time and you don't need to change data, right? It's a read-only integration normally, so you can show perhaps a balance of an account from 2 or 3 days ago, but you're not going to make a payment or conduct a transaction. You're just reporting on these systems. A small software agent can work pretty well for that on-premise. It's fairly lightweight, not nearly the same level of complexity as these on-premise software deployments are. That can be an okay solution, but certainly feature restricted. APIs are obviously the best way to handle these data integration problems. And despite a lot of talk from the large software providers in the core banking space, there really isn't a lot of motion around implementing these really anywhere. A lot of proof of concepts, a lot of marketing material, but we really still don't see the APIs that exist for the vast majority of community banking institutions out there. The most common way that we've seen this done, and probably the way that your product or your customers have used in the past that they're most familiar with, is a networking-based approach. As Lance mentioned earlier, VPN or MPLS solutions have been around a long time. Many community FIs in their server closets or data centers have 4, 5, 6 different boxes, Cisco boxes or other boxes, that are used to terminate these connections. This is very common. They understand that model very well, and it can deliver a very high level of functionality in terms of the ability to read and write data from the core banking system. So that enables all sorts of transactions, all sorts of integrations. The availability and uptime can be very good. It's very secure. It's compliant. The FFIEC and OCC regulations anticipate this sort of configuration and have specific guidelines on what has to happen. The downside to this is cost. This is very expensive, both from a monetary perspective and from a human resources perspective. The IT teams at the community FI side spend quite a bit of time on this. IT teams at the software provider side spend an incredible amount of time on this. A lot of finger pointing happens. Whose fault is it? Why are we down? Is it your side or my side? Just a very difficult, very complex, very expensive solution, but it is the gold standard historically. And then finally, data aggregators, which are fairly newer phenomenon and really struggle to integrate the community FI space. These folks typically provide an API interface, but in most cases are limited to just the largest banks in the country, the name brands we all know, the largest credit unions, perhaps the largest regional banks will participate. But for thousands and thousands of prospective customers for software, for digital banking, mobile banking, it's not really a good option. It also has some fairly serious feature limitations and restrictions. And so quite often still we see this done with screen scraping technology or some middleware that is essentially doing that. And that will give you sort of the batch experience, but in more real time. So the data is current, but you're typically able only to read data. You're not going to be able to make a payment or to get involved in the bill pay or transfers or any of those sort of higher value features that are really par for the course in most modern digital banking applications and the associated features around that. So that's really how we've seen it done thus far. Now we'll look at sort of the next stage of what our customers are needing, right? And so many of our customers, in fact, I would say all of our customers at this time are either in public cloud environments. If that's news to you, that is a question we get a lot, is that folks are unsure if this community banking space is ready to have a public cloud application integrate to their data centers and their proprietary data. The answer overwhelmingly has been yes, and there are, as we know it, many of the major providers have already gone this route. Thousands of FIs are using solutions by that. That doesn't mean that there's not some reservation about that there's some reluctance, certainly a lot of questions, but in our experience, that can be easily overcome. The support for multiple environments, right? So this means, like for many of our customers, it's not a public cloud only or a private data center only. And it also is fundamentally a connection between organizations. So this is focused on a software provider that has to deliver a solution into their customer environments. That's a very different problem than most solutions are solving today. The legacy VPN and MPLS solutions definitely can support that. But when we find more modern solutions like SD-WAN that come up, they really struggle with that problem. Now, obviously, we all watch the news. We all see the stories that seem to be more numerous every day. And they seem that way because they are. In a COVID world, the number of cyber attacks have escalated dramatically. And we want to make sure that any solution that our customers are engaged in is going to increase the overall level of security and provide more protection for the account holder data and the FI systems that they're integrating to. At the same time, compliance is obviously a nonstop concern in this space. And we really want to make sure that we are enabling compliance with standards like FFIEC and OCC and PCI, really through an automation perspective. That's the focus of many of our customers there. Obviously, digital banking and associated features have become, for many community FIs, the most important branch. That was happening at a very fast pace prior to COVID. And with the closings of many branches and work from home, you really can't underestimate the importance of being up all the time. It is the primary method that many customers are using for banking today. And they expect to have that reliability of a major application. And then finally, our customers really are wanting a solution for the management burdens of some of these other solutions that we talked about. They want the ability to get out of having command line interfaces to many devices, unique configurations, a bunch of passwords to manage. They want one portal where they can go and see, is it working, make basic changes, access audit log history, and get all that in a very simple manner, designed more for the modern environment, for a cloud-like experience that they're getting on one side of the equation. They want that same experience on the other side as well. So Trustgrid was born in that space, right? Our early customers with Q2 and with Aperture, which was a spin out there of First Data. We helped customize this solution to meet this specific need and to deliver all of those features and benefits that we mentioned on the previous slide. So Trustgrid is a cloud native next generation SD-WAN. And so though we have features that look a lot like branch office networking, really are designed to deliver from a cloud down to a customer's data center or branch office environments. And those are some very unique challenges. We also do multi-cloud. So many of our customers are running applications across various public clouds and private clouds and data centers as well. From a high level, just looking at the architecture of how this system is set up, on the left-hand side, we can see a cloud-hosted application. This could be in Amazon, it could be in Azure, Google, Oracle, it could be in data centers, Rackspace, all of those systems. A Trustgrid gateway node, and typically a high availability pair of gateway nodes, is deployed in that infrastructure. And then Trustgrid nodes, edge nodes, another way to think of them, are sent down into the FI data centers. So those are pre-configured, shipped on premise, plugged in by a representative of the FI in their data centers. And there's a lot of details that go into that. Obviously, if you've done that before, that can be a pretty complex installation. Trustgrid dramatically simplifies that, makes that much easier on our customers, and then exposes that core banking data very securely with a full encrypted tunnel from that on-premise data center environment up to the cloud infrastructure. All of this is done, is managed through a centralized management infrastructure that Trustgrid hosts in the cloud. That handles everything from changing of IP addresses to capturing of net flows, managing all the configuration data, issuing all the certificates, managing those. So really all the legwork of operating this infrastructure is done from that cloud. But a very important point is that the data, the account holder data or other data that's being sent between that cloud hosted application and that on-premise core banking data never goes through Trustgrid's cloud. It's going to go directly from the data centers of the FIs into the cloud or private data center infrastructure by the software provider. So the first thing we want to talk about when we dig down into the details here is the deployment experience. Deployment is a big hassle for our customers as the software providers and for their users, for the FIs that are ultimately responsible for getting bank account holders onto the system itself. And these deployments, when we get involved with our customers, typically are taking anywhere from many weeks to many months to get the initial tunnels stood up and to begin the integration work. And it's a long time to go from onboarding a new customer and a new set of users for them to be functional. It's definitely a point of friction, I think, in the industry. And one of the things that our early customers really focused on is having us improve that experience. So Trustgrid can be deployed in any public cloud environment. It's deployed very easily in Amazon and Azure, Google, and Oracle. But the vast majority of the deployments that we do are with community financial institutions and in their private data centers. And that today is still done on hardware appliances for the most part. It's not the only option. We do support virtual appliances on VMware and Microsoft Hyper-V. But by and large, the easiest way to get software on-premise today in a data center is through shipping a box. It fits into the existing processes these FIs have used for years. The box looks a lot like a router or a firewall that they've seen in the past, and they're just used to doing it that way. And when you have the number of these connections that we help our customers manage, optimizing that part of the process is very important. Many of these appliances, as you can see here, this has the Trustgrid logo. This is a front plate on one of the appliances, the very popular models that we sell. But our customers frequently, almost always, opt to replace that with their own logo on the box. And that really helps overcome some confusion. It's nice from a branding perspective. I think people like that. It looks nice. But really, it's designed to help on the support and management side as well. When you're working with a community FI that might have several different devices for this purpose, being able to identify your device in that infrastructure and making sure that they're looking at lights, LEDs on or off, if a power recycle is required or anything like that, or even like a console access, you want to make sure you're dealing with the right device, and that certainly can avoid some embarrassing moments. So this management side, and we touched on this earlier as well, but the ability really to see what is the current status, what is working and what is not right now. In the days of DMVPNs and MPLS circuits and these sort of things, you typically had a number of different tools. Maybe your network engineer could log into the device at the command line level. He could run some commands. A bunch of text is going to float past the screen, and he's going to look at that and interpret that and see what's up and what's not. That's great. Just requires a very high level of skill set. If something bad happens after hours, not many organizations have those guys staffed 24/7. They're waking somebody up. They're expensive guys with very complex skill sets that probably are working on other things, and they're stopping those other things to come help you with, figuring out basics. Like, is this connection up or down? Is it a high quality connection right now, or is there some potential problem that's occurring with it? So Trustgrid really takes all of those things that you would have done at the command line, or you would have called a third-party provider for, maybe your telco, to get a status in an MPLS circuit. We put it in this portal and we make it really easy. It's one login, obviously multi-factor, but you can log in and see, is it working? Is it working in a way that I expect it to be working? Are there errors on the connection? Has anybody made a change recently to it? All those things very easy to get to here. The building of these networks is very simple to do in the portal. I think it's far simpler, even though it's a bit different than how it was done in previous next generation firewalls, routers, or switches. It's all done through the portal or through the API. You're going to have field validation. You're going to be able to have documentation. You're going to see the right ways to do this. And Trustgrid helps with a lot of that as well, right? That's the expertise that we bring to the table here. It's not just providing of the software, but it is helping with best practices and side-by-side configuration when there's some confusion. Obviously, troubleshooting is something we do a lot with our customers and provide that tier 2, tier 3 support. So we help you build those segmented networks. And that allows you to make sure that the traffic between one of your customers never crosses over with another customer. And we even can integrate that into your data center and cloud environments if you have that segmentation done all the way to the application or all the way to the data level. Monitoring of these circuits is something that we do very well. Many of our customers do rely on SNMP monitoring tools still. They've had those in place. They've paid for them. They like them. They've built processes and systems around them. And so that can be a complement to the Trustgrid solution. But for our customers that don't have those resources, they typically find that Trustgrid can do the vast majority of the monitoring they want. And so our system is pretty complex as it regards the alarms that we call them. An alarm can be generated from a number of different data points in the system, and that alarm can be pushed into your communication tools like Slack or Teams. Obviously, you can send an email. It also can go to PagerDuty or Ops Genie and those sort of tools. So you really can get those high priority alarms escalated to the right people very quickly. We do support automated disaster recovery and failover, and how we differentiate those. So many of our customers, our software provider customers that connect to community FIs, are connecting to multiple data centers at those FIs. Those FIs have their own disaster recovery solutions. They've spread their infrastructure across 2 different data centers or more, and they have very specific processes on how and when to fail over, what sort of outages produce that. And we can accommodate really a wide variety of those configurations at this point in time with the thousands and thousands of installs we've done in this space. Then finally, uptime. We beat this one up pretty good. Trustgrid stands behind the uptime with a service level agreement. We have a variety of different levels on there, a standard level and an enhanced level. But for those customers that want that 99.99% uptime, we certainly can get that on these connections. Let's talk more about the security and compliance. This comes up a lot. It should. Very important in this industry. I think very few industries in the world take security and compliance as seriously as the community banking space does. So we've really built a lot of security focused features into the product to ensure that you're meeting those compliance standards and to avoid, obviously, the risk of breach, at least to minimize the risk of that breach. And so the first thing that we talk a lot about is zero trust architecture. This is a very common buzzword right now. You can hardly open your favorite networking website without reading a lot about it. It's really becoming, I think, common in terms of usage, but we see a lot of variation on what it really means, right? And for Trustgrid, zero trust is very simple. It means that we do not allow any connection, any data to pass from any FI to any cloud system without specific authorization. And that authorization occurs at a number of different levels and subject to a number of different constraints. And so just because you're on the network, you're connected, you have a device, the tunnel is up, there is no data that can pass in that situation. We have a lot of new innovations around this as well in terms of identifying some of that data and identifying some connections that might look suspicious. All of that is sort of that next generation of zero trust, but at its basic level, we just don't permit any traffic until it's specifically authorized. We also offer a private data plane, and this is unique in the space that we're in. And that's, as we talked about before, the fact that your data is going to go directly to your software provider or vice versa, the FI's data. And so you're never going to go through a multi-tenant infrastructure. For instance, there's no data from a software provider or from an FI that goes through Trustgrid's cloud infrastructure. Now that data plane is assigned to each Trustgrid customer. So a digital banking provider might have one data plane for hundreds or thousands of FIs. Each one is carefully segmented and protected along the way. End-to-end encryption, obviously required by FFIEC, OCC, PCI. Trustgrid does this a little bit differently than most too. We use TLS 1.2 today. We use mutual authentication as well. So both a client side and a server side certificate. So probably that next level up from what you might be using on your public facing websites, right? Client side certificates are very difficult to manage, but not in the Trustgrid world where we control both sides of that. This is not a browser. We have plans to release TLS 1.3 in the near future as well. That's going to be a PCI requirement at some point in time. They're talking a lot about it. They have some dates out there. We take care of all that. Another pain point that we talk a lot about with users and customers is patching and updates. I mentioned those FIs that have several or even a dozen boxes up on shelves from various providers. That are building VPN tunnels, IPsec VPN tunnels back to centralized applications. And the reality is those devices don't get patched or updated that much. That's it's a difficult thing to do when you have hundreds or thousands of those devices. Maintenance windows have to be scheduled. there's a risk the patch doesn't work and now a device is down and we have downtime associated with it. And so unfortunately, we see a lot of vulnerabilities out there on that equipment from providers that are household names across the world. And this is an issue that Trustgrid does address. We automate the patching at the operating system level, at the application level. And we do it in a way that has a lot of failback and fault tolerance, so that if that update doesn't work for some reason, we're not going to have a brick device. We can do hundreds or thousands of these patches very easily, all automated through our API, using advanced techniques like blue-green deployments and a lot of different features that go into that. Logging and reporting, obviously a huge deal here. That's a great on the compliance side, but it really is great on the troubleshooting, availability, security side as well. We log everything, so no user can make a change via API or the portal that isn't logged. You have all the net flows. You have obviously the ability to back that up with SNMP as well, and syslog, all the standard features there. And then the ability to generate reports. And that's really two ways. We have some standardized reports that our customers have requested in the portal. And then the API exposes all of that data as well. So if you want to get data out of the Trustgrid system to support your SLA commitments to your customers, that's very easy to do. We make that very simple. A lot of examples. We have an open API standardized documentation. So really easy, and we can help out as well. Finally, monitoring and alerting. We went into that, I think, a lot in the last slide, but it is a critical part of the security and compliance piece. You want to know when things are happening. You want to respond to them quickly and get skilled folks involved when potential problems are occurring. So the Trustgrid solution for our customers goes beyond just connectivity. This is something that's puts us right at the state of the art in modern edge infrastructure, what Gartner's calling WAN edge infrastructure today. There's three major pieces here, one of which we've talked about quite a bit so far, which is what we consider the site-to-site networking. You might hear this called SD-WAN 2.0 or cloud native networking as a service. In typical tech speak, we have a number of different ways to describe that one, and we're always trying new ones. The other pieces that we haven't talked about yet, though, that our customers find valuable are edge computing infrastructure. This allows customers to actually deploy containerized applications on the Trustgrid nodes. And so far more than just a network appliance, far more than a router or a VPN endpoint, our solutions can run applications. And they can integrate those applications into our customers' CI/CD pipelines so that they can easily publish new versions or bug fixes to a container and deploy that globally in a matter of minutes. Each container's got some very specific resources that can be constrained to it, has access to the local network as well as the virtual network. And this is really a great feature. And one of the interesting use cases we see are for integration with certain core banking platforms that will remain nameless on this presentation, that never really were designed to be connected to the internet. Never anticipated a use case where a digital banking platform would be hosted in Amazon and this core banking system is running on premise. And so if the tunnel drops or latency gets too high or there's packet loss, there's errors, it can hang, and it can hang both sides of that connection and require manual intervention to be working. Easy enough to push that connector or interface, as you might call it, as a container on premise, and then expose that data via API up to the centralized application. We see that quite a bit. It works very well. Finally, remote access and zero trust network access, the Gartner term for that, ZTNA. This can be thought of in a few different ways. And the way that we mean it here is the ability to log in easily and securely without a VPN client to those on-premise systems. That could be a container running on that edge computing platform, to troubleshoot that. Perhaps a developer wants to log in and tail the logs or something. But it could also be an appliance that's adjacent to it. And so in some cases, the applications that are being deployed in those on-premise data centers are more complex than what you can put into a container on a Trustgrid node, or perhaps the Trustgrid node was sized to have a certain amount of capability, right, of compute, of RAM, of disk space. And what you need is more than what we have on premise. And so you install another appliance side by side, but you still want the ability to manage that in a very similar fashion. Trustgrid provides that secure access to that. And then finally, right, all these pieces tied into that portal. You've seen a couple of screenshots at this point in time. We've talked about it, but all managed through one cloud portal. So one thing that our customers tell us about our platform when evaluating it against both the way they've always done things, one of those first few ways from that first slide, and also the other products that are on the market today, the SD-WAN products and the various cloud providers that have solutions that can do parts of what we can do. What they like about us is they use this phrase a lot, future-proof, right? They frequently are doing just connectivity today, and they want the connectivity is what they're having to replace. There might be an end-of-life issue or end-of-support issue on their appliances. They're going to the cloud, and those appliances don't work well in the cloud, but they want the connectivity. However, when they understand these more advanced features, the edge computing, the ZTNA pieces, the managed services delivery approach, what they see is a platform that goes above and beyond their existing needs and can evolve with them as their needs inevitably change to support new products, new services, innovation across their portfolio, new customer needs, changes in their customer environments, changes in customer buying habits. You really want a fully featured platform that can evolve over time with you, because if you've ever installed one of these systems before, you know that it doesn't change very easily, right? You want a solution that once in place is going to meet your needs, not just today, but for many years to come. And we firmly believe, and our customers will attest, that Trustgrid is that platform. Let's talk today about a couple of customers. I mentioned Q2 earlier as well. This is one that worked hand in hand with us early on. And we really were able to deliver an amazing result for them. Their case study is actually on our website. We've got an interview with their CIO, Lou Sanko, says some very nice things about us. We appreciate that, but tells you his experience firsthand and how we ended up replacing a DMVPN solution for them for several hundred FIs with the Trustgrid solution. Q2 came to us with a Cisco end of life concern. They know they needed to replace some of these devices. And as Lou said, he did not want to continue to experience some of the challenges they had experienced in the past. Lou even mentions, I think in the video, he came from another provider that had even more of these devices out there, and it just became an unmanageable piece of the infrastructure at scale. They wanted to address that, but because it was a long-term commitment, they really had three other issues ongoing. Application modernization, like everybody, is constantly evolving their applications to deliver new features, new services, new solutions on newer infrastructure, better security, better availability. And that certainly is a primary focus at Q2. And they wanted a platform that could meet those requirements going forward. They were really focused on the need to move to a public cloud environment at some point in time. That was an active evaluation for them. They were looking for public cloud support from their new provider. And then as they integrated new solutions, if you follow Q2 much, they're very active in the M&A space, always integrating new features, new solutions into their portfolio for their customers. They wanted to make sure it would work for them as well. They didn't want to be pigeonholed into a solution that would require running 2 or 3 or more different products to get the infrastructure support they want. So we were able to check all those boxes. And then over a period of time, we've been able to deploy well over 1,000 nodes for them right now. That number is quite a bit higher than that, I believe, at this time. Really cutting the deployment times for them. They went from months to get their VPN tunnels stood up to a matter of days, sometimes weeks more commonly, but certainly never months. All the network operations were able to be centralized in the portal. Their NOC team, their tier 1, tier 2 NOC resources on the support desk were able to do so much more with the Trustgrid solution than with the legacy solution. And then that is really a boon for their network engineering teams and their cloud teams, because they're not constantly having to do tech support on the system. So 2,000 nodes is very accurate right now in terms of total commitment. And then the ROI was just very clear. The old model of buying hardware, of buying support contracts, it's incredibly expensive. We were able to do it for a lot less on this system. And then another case study here, Aperture, which most folks might, if you go way back, you know them as Funds Express. They were acquired by First Data. They were then spun out and combined and done some other things too. But they were facing a data center closure. They knew they had to get out of their existing data center. They were going to Amazon. And Aperture pulled off, in my career, one of the more amazing cloud migration projects that I'd ever seen. Certainly just a very difficult project. That team did an outstanding job. We also have their case study on the website, and Brad Wisdom will tell you about what they went through there and the role that Trustgrid played in that process. But they managed to pull that migration off. They closed the data center down on time. They were fully up and running in Amazon. Their primary requirement there was tight integration with Amazon, and they did compare us to several other SD-WAN providers, and that really is where we shine. The ability to natively integrate to Amazon, to support advanced features like Amazon Transit Gateway, was critical. We were able to do all that. And then if you've ever done a cloud migration, you certainly are aware of the amount of work that goes into it. And Aperture realized that they just weren't going to be able to do both an edge infrastructure migration and a cloud migration simultaneously without a lot of help. And our services, our professional services that were able to help with that migration, really made a difference during the decision-making process and also during implementation. And then finally, the automated security and compliance coming out of a large organization like First Data. Aperture had a lot of resources, but with the spin-out nature of that, obviously there was going to be a limited number of resources that made that spin-out. First Data's got a lot of other stuff to manage, and they've since gone on and done other things, but they wanted to automate that security and compliance piece. They'll go into detail on the website. There's a video there, but yeah, we had the whole thing done for several hundred FIs within 6 months from go. The solutions work great. We met all their availability, reliability, compliance, security targets. And the thing's been going now. We're getting close to 3 years on that one. So really great customer. We've appreciated their partnership. Another area that we've gotten into here recently is the healthcare space. So we've landed a few customers in healthcare technology, specifically in medical imaging. It's a pretty interesting use case, and I see some parallels to where the banking sector is as well, perhaps with ATMs and these automated kiosks. But these guys have an MRI machine on premise, and that MRI machine isn't going to the cloud anytime soon, right? So they need to be able to integrate the data from that MRI machine with their cloud-based applications. And so this was actually a really strong use case for the container support, the edge computing features of the Trustgrid product, where they were able to containerize their application that handles the DICOM image protocol, push that out on top of a Trustgrid node, get the connectivity, get the encryption, get the application deployed on premise they need, maintain that HIPAA compliancy, which is so important for them, and have it all done via a managed service. They'd spent quite a bit of time handling these deployments in years past. Much like you've heard before, the deployment times were very difficult, ongoing support and management, ongoing security, all those things that made this a really difficult problem for them to solve. That Trustgrid now is able to resolve for them, mostly via software. Yeah, so just a little brief snippet here, some background on Trustgrid. Over 2,000 nodes installed and in production across all of our customers. Over 1,000 organizations are using Trustgrid software today. We're a SOC 2 Type 2 compliant organization, very important from a managed services provider like us. About $3 trillion of financial transactions are run across the Trustgrid network today. That's bill payments and mortgage payments and payrolls and all that kind of stuff. About 40 million users access digital banking today with a Trustgrid connection on the back end that they will never see, but rely on heavily.
Great. Thanks, Joe. That's all the slides that we had for today. Get a couple of questions come in. The first one is, does Trustgrid work for apps that are not in the cloud? Joe, you want to take that?
Yeah, so several of our customers, cloud isn't for everybody, and not at any time or every time. So yeah, they're running in their own data centers. They're running VMware, vSphere. They're running Hyper-V. They're running in managed solutions like Rackspace and kind of all the above. So yeah, it's a great solution. We try to support every possible environment that we can, either with hardware appliances or virtual appliances. And it's really a solid solution.
Okay. And the last question is, what is the deployment process like for an FI data center?
That's a great question. So you say if it's a new FI signing up for new banking services with a software provider, we typically get involved fairly early. A lot of FIs have questions up front around compliance, around security, around what the heck is this? and we'll help answer all those questions initially. And then once contracts are signed, customers getting onboarded, we get involved there with that FI's IT team. There is some information we need to get from them, IP addresses and DNS servers and hosts on premise, their IPs, these sort of things. They fill out an encrypted web form for us with this. We help them decide on the appropriate architecture for their data centers and disaster recovery plan. We pre-configure the appliances, either hardware or virtual, deliver them on premise, sometimes 3-4 days, sometimes a couple of weeks, depending on the urgency with which that FI addresses the situation. And then the appliances arrive on site. They're completely self-contained. They have network cables and power cables and everything you'll need to get the thing connected, rack mount where appropriate. An on-premise contact from the FI does have to connect Ethernet and power. There are sometimes firewall rule changes to allow outbound traffic. There's no port forwards of any sort required to support this. They make those few changes. The tunnels are built automatically. We test it, configure it, and then we turn it over to our customer for testing, integration work, et cetera. So very simple, very easy. We had a end user a few weeks ago that was going through that process, connected the power and the Ethernet, and he said, I don't know what magic this is, but I like it. And that's really kind of a common consensus that we've heard. It's just far easier for them to get these devices installed and configured, happens faster, less burden on your customers' IT teams to make this work.
Great. Yeah, pretty great compliment. All right, that's all that we have for today. Thank you for everyone who attended. If you'd like a personalized demo, we do have a demo request button on our website at trustgrid.io. And again, thanks for attending, and we hope to hear from you soon.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
All right.